The day Natalie Carter reviewed her office security footage, she expected to find a thief. What she found instead shattered every wall she had built around her heart. Natalie Carter was not a woman who cried. Not in boardrooms. Not in depositions. Not even at her own mother's funeral 3 years ago when she stood at the podium and delivered a eulogy so composed that 3 of her board members later told her it was the most impressive thing they had ever seen her do. She was 41 years old, the CEO of Carter Meridian Group, a real estate development firm with offices in Chicago, Dallas, and New York, and she had spent the last 6 years running a company, raising a daughter and quietly falling apart in the only way powerful people allow themselves to, invisibly. Her daughter Lily was 9 years old and had not smiled. Not really smiled. Not the kind that reached her eyes and stayed there. Not since the accident. Marcus Carter had been Natalie's husband for 11 years. A tall, handsome architect with dark eyes and a laugh that filled every room he walked into. He died on a Tuesday morning in February 4 years ago when a driver ran a red light on Michigan Avenue, and Marcus, who had been walking to his favorite coffee shop 2 blocks from their townhouse, never made it back. Lily had been 5, old enough to remember, old enough to grieve in ways that 5-year-olds should never have to. For 4 years, Natalie had taken Lily to therapists, enrolled her in art classes, moved her to a new school with a better counselor, bought her a puppy named Biscuit who Lily loved but who could not fill the particular silence that had settled over their home like a second roof. And then one morning in October, Natalie was reviewing the overnight security footage from the lobby of her office building because her operations manager had flagged a discrepancy in the visitor log, and she clicked through the timestamps one by one, and then she stopped. She leaned forward in her chair. She pulled her glasses off and rubbed her eyes and put them back on. And then she watched the same 47 seconds of footage 4 times in a row, and by the 4th time there were tears running silently down her face, and she did not even notice them until one dropped onto the keyboard. But to understand what she saw, you have to understand who Daniel Reyes was, and why he was in that lobby at all, and what it meant that her daughter knew his name before Natalie did. Daniel Reyes had come to Carter Meridian Group 6 weeks earlier as a contract maintenance technician, hired through a third-party facilities company to handle the building's aging HVAC system before winter set in. He was 36 years old, broad-shouldered and quietly handsome with sharp cheekbones, dark hair that curled slightly at the temples, and the kind of calm brown eyes that made people feel immediately that whatever they had just said to him had been genuinely heard. He wore his work uniform, navy pants, a fitted gray jacket with the facilities company logo on the chest, with a natural ease that made it look less like a uniform and more like something he had simply chosen that morning because it suited him. He did not talk much around the other contractors. He showed up early, worked without complaint, and left without fanfare. The building staff liked him, but none of them knew much about him. What none of them knew, what Natalie herself did not know until she pulled his contractor file that same morning after watching the footage, was that Daniel Reyes was also a single father. His daughter Sophia was 8 years old, 1 grade below Lily at the same school on the north side of Chicago, and every Tuesday and Thursday when Daniel's shift ended at 4:30, he would walk the 6 blocks to Westfield Elementary to pick her up because the after-school program ended at 4:45 and he refused to be the last parent in the parking lot 2 days in a row. It was Sophia who had first spoken to Lily. Natalie learned this later. Sophia was the kind of child who introduced herself to everyone, the janitor, the librarian, the new girl sitting alone on the bench near the swings. And one Thursday afternoon 3 weeks before the security footage incident, she had sat down next to Lily on that bench and said with complete confidence and zero preamble, "I like your shoes. Do you want to see a magic trick?" And Lily, who had been sitting alone reading a book about ocean animals, had looked up and said yes. They had been inseparable at school ever since. But Natalie had not known that either. She had not known because Lily did not talk much about school, and Natalie, buried under quarterly earnings reports and a lawsuit involving a contractor in Dallas, had not asked enough. And then came the Tuesday that changed everything. Daniel had been finishing a repair on the 3rd-floor ventilation unit when he realized he had left his tool bag in the lobby. He came back down at 4:52 in the afternoon. Natalie's office was on the 14th floor. Lily was in the building because Natalie's assistant Clara had picked her up from school that day and brought her to the office while Natalie finished a call, something that happened 2 or 3 times a month, and Lily usually sat in the small glass conference room off the main hallway with her tablet and her headphones and waited quietly like a child who had learned very early that the world moved on schedules she had no power over. But on that Tuesday, Lily was not in the conference room. She had come downstairs to the lobby to ask Clara something, and Clara was not at the front desk, and Lily was standing near the elevator bank looking small and uncertain when Daniel walked back in through the service entrance with his tool bag over his shoulder and stopped when he saw her. He did not know whose daughter she was. He only knew she looked the way Sophia sometimes looked when she thought no one was watching her. Like she was carrying something heavier than a 9-year-old should have to carry alone. He crouched down so he was at her level, which was something Natalie noticed when she watched the footage, that he went all the way down, not a partial lean but fully down on one knee like her eye line mattered, and he said something to her. The footage had no audio. Lily looked at him for a moment and then she said something back. And then Daniel reached into the front pocket of his jacket and took out a small object and showed it to her, and even on the grainy security camera Natalie could see what it was. A tiny origami crane, perfectly folded, pale blue, the size of a matchbook, and Lily looked at it and then she looked at Daniel and then she smiled. Not a polite smile. Not the careful managed smile she gave Natalie's colleagues when they said she was getting so big. A real one. Wide and sudden and completely unguarded. The smile of a child who had momentarily forgotten to be sad. And it transformed her face so completely that Natalie, watching from the 14th floor 4 weeks later, pressed her hand over her mouth and could not breathe for a moment. Daniel said something else, still crouching, and Lily laughed, and took the crane carefully in both hands like it was something precious, and then Clara appeared from around the corner and Lily looked up and showed Clara the crane and Clara smiled and Lily looked back at Daniel and said something and he stood up and nodded and walked toward the service elevator and that was it. 47 seconds. But what Natalie did not know, what she was about to find out, was that it was not the first time. When Natalie pulled the full archive of lobby footage going back 6 weeks, she found 7 separate moments. 7 times that Daniel Reyes had crossed paths with her daughter in that lobby or near the building entrance. Always briefly, always incidentally, never planned. And in every single one of them Lily was smiling or laughing or looking at something Daniel had shown her with that same wide-open expression that Natalie had not seen on her daughter's face in 4 years. There was one where he had drawn something on a notepad and torn the page out and handed it to her and Lily had studied it with the intense focus she usually reserved for her ocean books. There was one where he had clearly told her a joke because Lily threw her head back and covered her mouth with both hands the way she did when something genuinely surprised her into laughter. There was one, the hardest one to watch, where Lily had been crying. Natalie did not know why, had not known it had even happened, and Daniel had sat down on the lobby bench beside her, not touching her, not trying to fix it, just sitting there with the steady, unhurried presence of someone who understood that sometimes people just needed to not be alone in it. And after a few minutes Lily had stopped crying and said something and he had responded and she had almost smiled and then fully smiled and wiped her face with her sleeve. Natalie watched that one twice and then she closed her laptop and sat in her office for a long time looking out at the Chicago skyline and thinking about what it meant that a stranger had given her daughter more moments of genuine joy in 6 weeks than she had managed to give her in 4 years of trying. She was not angry. She was not suspicious. She was something much more complicated than either of those things. She called Clara into her office and asked her if she knew anything about the man in the lobby footage and Clara said yes actually. She had seen them talking a couple of times. He seemed very kind. And then Clara paused and said, his daughter goes to Lily's school, I think. Lily mentioned her once, a girl named Sophia. And that was the moment everything reorganized itself in Natalie's mind. She requested a formal meeting with Daniel through the facilities company, which confused the facilities manager enough that he called her assistant twice to confirm it was not a complaint. Daniel arrived at her office the following Monday in a clean white button-down and dark slacks, no longer in his work uniform, and he was even more composed in person than he had appeared on the grainy footage, with a quiet directness in his eyes that did not flinch when she thanked him. And she did thank him, directly and without preamble the way she did everything. She pulled up the footage on her laptop and turned it to face him and said, I want you to know what you did for my daughter and I want to say thank you in person. Daniel watched the footage in silence, and when he looked up his expression was thoughtful rather than surprised, as though he had already understood something about Lily that he had simply been waiting for someone else to see too. He said, she reminded me of Sophia after her mother left. That particular kind of quiet. He said it simply, without self-pity or performance, and Natalie understood immediately what he meant and nodded, and for a moment they were just two parents sitting across a conference table who had both learned to carry loss in public without letting it show and who recognized that particular skill in each other the way survivors always do. They talked for 40 minutes. He told her about Sophia, about the custody arrangement that had dissolved 2 years ago when his ex-wife moved to Portland and decided the distance was easier, about how he had built his entire life around his daughter's schedule, about the origami he had learned from his grandfather in Albuquerque, and had taught Sophia and apparently had been sharing with Lily piece by piece, because Sophia had told him once that Lily seemed like someone who needed something small and beautiful to hold on to. Natalie told him things she had not told anyone. About the grief that had not gotten smaller with time, only more familiar. About the guilt of being a mother who was better at running a company than sitting still long enough for her daughter to climb into her lap and fall asleep. about how she had watched that 47-second clip of Lily's real smile 4 times in a row and cried alone in her office and not known what to do with what she felt. By the end of the meeting, she had offered him a permanent facilities management position at Carter Meridian that paid significantly more than contract work and came with benefits and a stable schedule, and he had looked at her for a long moment and said, "Is this because of the job or because of Lily?" And she had said both, and I think that's allowed. He started the permanent role 3 weeks later. Sophia and Lily became the kind of friends who finished each other's sentences within a month. On the first Saturday in December, Daniel brought Sophia to a small holiday gathering at Natalie's townhouse, and at one point Natalie looked across the living room and saw Lily and Sophia cross-legged on the floor teaching Biscuit the dog to sit using pieces of string cheese as bribery, and she felt something shift in her chest that she did not have a name for yet, but that felt like the first morning after a very long winter. Daniel was standing near the fireplace with a glass of cider watching the same scene, and he looked over at Natalie and said nothing, just nodded slightly, and she nodded back, and that was enough. It was not a love story. Not yet. It was something quieter and more important than that. It was 2 people who had each been holding everything together alone for so long that they had forgotten what it felt like to stand next to someone else who was also holding and not have to explain the weight. In the months that followed, there were dinners, first with the girls and then sometimes just the 2 of them, and there was an evening in March when Lily climbed into Natalie's bed at midnight and said, "I like Sophia's dad. He listens like Dad used to listen," and Natalie held her daughter in the dark for a long time and did not say anything because there was nothing to say that would be more true than that. Daniel gave Lily 17 origami cranes over the course of that year. She kept every one of them in a small wooden box on her nightstand. On the last one, which he folded at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning while Sophia and Lily baked something loud and flour-covered in the background, he tucked a tiny note inside the wing. It said, "Your dad sounds like he was someone worth missing." Lily read it and looked at Daniel for a long moment and then walked over and hugged him around the middle without saying anything, and he put his hand gently on the top of her head, and Natalie, standing in the doorway with a coffee cup, watched her daughter choose to trust someone again and understood that this was what healing looked like. Not dramatic, not sudden, not the way it happened in the movies, but small and flower-dusted and quiet on a Sunday morning with the smell of something sweet in the oven and a child deciding on her own that the world was worth opening back up to. If the story moved you, subscribe to Tales of a Solo Father, because every week we tell the stories of the men who show up, who stay, who fold paper cranes at kitchen tables and sit on lobby benches and listen like it matters, because it does. Hit the bell so you never miss one. This is Tales of a Solo Father.